Hey, welcome back to my channel, and this video is for you if you just started out shooting GoPro videos, because here I will share my best tips with you to get more professional and cinematic GoPro footage. Definitely make sure to watch the entire video, because I'm 100% sure that there's the one or the other tip that you did not even think about before. And there's actually no intro on this channel, so let's get started directly. So my first tip is that directly after buying the GoPro Hero 8, you should upgrade to the newest firmware, and that's because you want to have hypersmooth stabilization at 4K 60, what does not work with the first firmware that it usually comes with. That at least was the case on my GoPro Hero 8. And yeah, having hypersmooth stabilization at 4K 60 makes it very easy to shoot smooth footage, because at first with 4K 60 you can slow it down later, you have slow motion, that makes it a bit smoother, and also when you have hypersmooth stabilization it's also smoother, so it looks very good. And I already mentioned my second tip in an Osmo Pocket tutorial about a year ago, and that is that you should shoot single shots instead of running around and filming everything, because at first that makes it a lot easier to edit your video, because you don't have to scroll around and look for what's usable and what's not, but it also lets you focus more on one specific subject in every single shot, and that's actually very important for a cinematic or professional video. You don't want to get shots that don't really have a point, and that's usually the case when you just run around and film everything. So instead you should really be aware of what's the main focus or the main subject in the shot that you do right now, and then you get a shot that's usually between 3 and 15 seconds. Better a little bit longer, but not too long. The most important thing is really to get single shots and don't just run randomly around filming everything. And the next tip is regarding framing. So what a lot of beginners do is they stand there with a camera just straight up and filming down if the subject is lower than them, and that usually looks pretty amateurish. So in most shots you want to be at least on the same level as your subject, or you want to go below it. If you go below it, that makes the subject look bigger, and if you're on the same level, that's usually a normal view that you want to have most of the time. But if you just stand there and the subject is below you, it doesn't have the same height, and you film down, then it always makes the subject appear small to the viewer, and that's nothing that you want in your video. So if you do that all the time, it definitely looks unprofessional. Sometimes, of course, if you want to get a quick shot for storytelling, it's okay to do that, but if you do it too much, then it doesn't look good at all. And the next tip is actually very important, and that is that you should add consistent camera movement in every shot. Not necessarily every shot, but most of them at least. And what most beginners do wrong here is to maybe move their camera forward and suddenly to the left or right, so they change directions in the shot. It's not always wrong to do that, but if you do it, you want to do it on purpose. Maybe you film one person at first and then you want to switch to the other to tell a story. But to be honest, in travel videos and so on, what you usually shoot with GoPro cameras, that's never the case that you really have to do that. So I wouldn't do that at all in your case. Instead, what you should do is simply focus on the basic camera movements, which is forward and backward movement, slight movements to the left and right, maybe slight movements up or down as well, then tilting your camera, panning to the left and right. So the very basics. And if you're just starting out with your GoPro camera or shooting video in general, then you should definitely train that at home. Even right now, where many people are under quarantine, you can do that in your apartment. Really just try the camera moves that I showed you before, and then later when you go out shooting travel videos or whatever, then your videos will be better instantly, just because you learn to do camera movement with your GoPro. And to be honest, it's actually very easy, because the stabilization of the GoPro, at least the Hero 8 and Hero 7, is so good that it's very hard to mess it up. To be honest, many of my camera movements are actually done like that. I just hold the GoPro in one hand and I get the shot. It's really that good. And our next tip actually applies when you move your camera, and that is that you should use foreground objects that you go a bit closer to, because camera movement is more visible when you have an object that is close to your camera and not far away. So for example, let's say you want to film a friend and she or he is far away, and you move your camera, then it might be that you can't really see the camera movement, or only slightly. But by adding some foreground objects, maybe some bushes or a wall, whatever you want, then the camera movement instantly becomes more visible, and that helps a lot to make the shot look more dynamic and create depth. So definitely use foreground objects. And by the way, how do you like the black background? Like when you watched last week's video about GoPro video editing and you saw this wall-like background, it's also cool, but I personally think that this background looks a bit more professional, or what do you think? Also, this room is actually a bit better sound-wise. I don't get so much hall here, so just leave in the comments below, please, which one you like more. And my next tip is also important when you move your camera, and that is that you should keep your main subject as much as possible in the center of the frame, because GoPro cameras have a super wide angle lens, and that means that you get distortion at the edges of the frame. So by keeping your subject away from the edges, you get less distortion, and therefore your videos look more natural and more professional. And what's also to mention in that regards is that because of this distortion and this wide angle, it's actually great to do forward and backward movements with GoPro cameras, because at first this distortion is not that visible. For example, if you do tilting shots with a GoPro, then you can easily see how the lines bend and it looks kind of weird. But if you do forward and backward moving shots, then you don't get this effect. It looks a lot better, and because of that wide angle, the movement becomes a lot more visible. So it's actually a great camera for that kind of movement. Another very important tip is to capture as many angles as possible, even if it's of the same subject, simply because that makes editing your video later a lot easier, and it also makes it more interesting to watch, because what many beginners do wrong at the beginning is that they cut way too long clips in their videos, and therefore it's very boring to watch for the viewer. And by covering multiple angles, you can replace long clips of one subject with multiple clips of the same subject, and therefore it's easier to watch. So let's say you have a 9-second clip, then you can replace that by three 3-second clips with different angles, even if it's the same subject, and therefore it's a lot easier to watch for the viewer, and it doesn't feel that long anymore. And also important to mention here, as for all photos and videos, is to make sure that you get good light, and that's usually the case when you shoot travel videos, at least when you go for sunrise or sunset. I personally prefer sunrise, because then the places are usually empty, you don't have many tourists there, so it's easier to get the shots you want. And also it depends a bit on the time of the year, but you oftentimes have some mist in the air and it just looks very beautiful. It's a very nice feeling. So if you haven't done yet, just go at sunrise to some places that you like and just see how it is then. I bet you will get better shots, and it also feels better. It's just wonderful at sunrise. The world is more beautiful at this time. Of course, if you can't do that, sunset is totally fine as well. It's both better than going at noon, for example, because then the sun shines from the top, and having lower sun always looks a lot better. You can also position that behind your subject, and then it also looks more cinematic. And yes, one more here, and that is that you should shoot time lapses with your GoPro. I actually made another video about that. It's called GoPro is actually a great time-lapse camera, so I will just link that here. You can watch that. It's actually, GoPro cameras are really cool for time-lapses. They make it very easy. You don't get flicker if you shoot in automatic mode and so on. So definitely go out, shoot some time-lapses with it. You will have a lot of fun, and these are cool shots that definitely wow your friends. But aside from all these tips, if you really want to step up your GoPro filmmaking game, if you want to create more professional and cinematic looking GoPro videos, then you really have to learn about GoPro cameras and about filmmaking in general. And that's why I put together the Cinematic GoPro Video Masterclass. That's an online course that you can do, and I want to make that course available to as many people as possible. That's why it's not expensive, and you will find a link to that in the description below, and I will most likely link that here as well. So if that sounds interesting, check it out. And aside from that, if you like this video, then please leave me a thumbs up, and if you want to see more filmmaking and GoPro tutorials in the future, then also make sure to hit the subscribe and the bell notifications button. See you in the next video.